Here. We have a quorum. This evening's committee meeting was basically focusing on what we'd like to call a TIF 101 educational committee meeting. Right now we've got many projects that the village is participating in with property acquisitions on Pulaski and other programs that are coming to the board, and especially with just bringing in 4 new trustees, it's always a good idea just to get everyone acclimated to how TIFs work, and I'd like to have the different representatives speak to how these work, including our Finance Director, Kent Olivan, our TIF consultants that are paid with the Pulaski Avenue TIF right now from the Mannheim Group, as well as Mary Schmidt. And we have representatives here, too, from a potential new business that may come into town for a Checkers restaurant. We can talk about that toward the end of the discussion as well. We should probably start this off with the way we had this outlined. Who was going to start? Was it Mr. Olivan?
Yeah, just very briefly. I won't take long. We're going to start off, as the mayor said, with the TIF 101. I'll come in just for a couple minutes to talk about the TIFs that we've had in the village, but then we're going to settle on the Pulaski TIF. And the reason we're settling on the Pulaski TIF right now is because we have a couple of applications, one of which we're going to talk about today. And as part of that, Chris Mannheim and Roger Hopkins will be discussing that in more detail. We have the applicant here. The idea, however, is, as we mentioned in the last meeting, is that we are going to have another meeting next Monday, and at that meeting, we will next Tuesday. I apologize because it's a holiday on Monday. It is next Tuesday on the 30th, and at that meeting, it will probably be, we'll talk to the attorneys, it may be an action item under a committee meeting. It'll probably be a special board meeting after a committee meeting in order to take action. If hopefully the board is made up its decision by then, all of the people who are speaking today, the mayor, myself, Chris and Roger, even Mary Thompson, although she doesn't know as much about the applicant, are available at any time to help you guys should you have questions because of the expedited timetable, which for a project this size isn't necessarily expedited, but given that it's all new TIFs and you're newly elected, it may feel rushed. So any way we can help you, we'd like to help you. Again, we'll start off TIF 101 by the expert, Mary Thompson of Kane McKenna. Anywhere you'd like, as long as you're speaking to the top of the mic. And you can, I'll tell you what, I'll even change your slides for you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Mary Thompson, Kane McKenna and Associates. I believe I handed out cards to those of you who didn't know me before. I have been with the village for several years, gone through several regimes, actually. We've created the tax increment finance districts that are here and working for the most part. And so if this gets a little overwhelming, it's purely intended to. I'm intending to just wow you with a lot of. So, TIF, what is it? What we're going to cover tonight is what a TIF is, when should it be the right tool, how is it implemented, and how is it financed. So TIF is a municipal incentive, one of the few that we have left. It was created in 1978, Big Jim Thompson's regime, actually, and it was meant to augment and help municipalities induce development in their community. At that time, they had a lot of other grants and incentives as well. Now, we're pretty limited. We have TIF, Cook County incentives, and enterprise zones as far as funding mechanisms. So it can be used, how can TIF be used? TIF can be used to acquire property, to create infrastructure, site preparation, pay for soft costs such as consultants, attorneys, and other applicable soft costs. TIF can pay for other eligible costs pursuant to the Act. Like what? Landscaping, lighting. What it can't pay for is brick and mortar. So it's everything except brick and mortar. Unless you're demolishing it, correct. And it can pay for just about everything involved with rehab. So, how does it work? Oh, I'm sorry. So this should mesh with all of your local planning and all of your local programs. So when is it the right tool? So is the area going to benefit from the designation? Do you need it to induce a project, commercial or industrial or residential, a little less often actually, or mixed use projects? So how is it implemented? You have to determine via a study if the area qualifies as a TIF per the state act. You can qualify a TIF as a conservation area. You can qualify a TIF as blighted. Yours are predicated on conservation area. It's the preferable term. The word blighted is not a nice term, and the definition of blighted in the Act is even not nicer. So the TIF is funded in a mechanism called pay-as-you-go or upfront. But I want to go back to where the money comes from. So when you create a TIF district, what happens is you have a base EAV. So let's say you have 10 properties in this TIF district, proposed TIF district, and you have a base EAV of $10,000. Okay? Now you have a developer come in, and they want to build a building in that area. And now that EAV jumps to $30,000. So you have $20,000 of increment as a result of that project that can be utilized. Now, those are property tax dollars. I should have made it easier and just said property tax dollars. But let's say they are. So that money comes back to the village in a special tax allocation fund to be used for all of those TIF eligible costs that we talked about. So the county freezes that base. All of the taxing districts continue to get their proportionate share of that base. The new increment comes into a special tax allocation fund that the municipality can use only in the TIF district, only for TIF eligible costs. Okay? So you can fund it with a developer note. So I'm the developer, I come in and I want to negotiate for some of that TIF increment money. I can't do this project without some help. Most incentive projects are predicated on but for. But for the incentive, you can't go forward. So they're going to negotiate to receive a fair amount of the increment back predicated on their TIF eligible costs. The goal is not to give away Restore. The goal is to have public-private partnerships. It can be funded with upfront bonds. We see that less and less. This is the basis for which I was just speaking with respect to designation of funds. So we have the big bucket, which has the base EAV in it and tax dollars. Now you have your smaller bucket with the incremental monies that come in for revenue, for expenses, excuse me. So there are some gray areas, no doubt about it. You have to look at this development when it comes in to make sure that there is a but-for. Utilize Kent, people like Kent, people like us, to analyze what the developer is telling you, making sure you want to help him or her. Try to anticipate the procedures for vetting, Identify more costs than needed in the event that there are changes. Review the detailed project budget. Again, because you want to identify your costs as well as their costs. TIF isn't only for developers. You have needs as well. You may want to put a road in. You may want to put sidewalks in. You may want to put a park in. So there are costs that you can incur using TIF dollars as well. Review all of the costs before you go forward. If bonds are issued, you will need bond counsel. You will need local attorney advice. Again, we don't see a lot of upfront bonds being issued anymore. When TIF was first created, we did. TIFs can last for 23 years. So the 23 years was basically because a lot of people, it does have bonding authority. So remember, you're always collecting in arrears. So the premise was you had a developer come in, they bought a piece of property, you issued bonds, they started the construction, you needed capitalized interest for 3 years, you're collecting the taxes a year in arrears, so you have 20-year bonds with 3 years of Cap 5. We still have 23-year terms, but we don't see a lot of bonds. This would be a wonderful tip. Going along, and all of a sudden you get this nice big increase. Go ahead.
That's not flashy.
That's not any of them. This is more likely what you're going to see. You're going to see a nice increase, a leveling out, and then hopefully a continued increase. This is a general assumption sheet that we utilize. This is one of our models. So you put the project in here, the square footage, the market value, if it's going to generate sales tax, how many square feet are going to generate sales tax, etc. The next sheet of the model will show you the property taxes that would be generated. As you can see, the 2 years are, the first 2 years you have nothing. Going back to that lag in collection. Okay. So policy considerations are making sure there's a but-for, what effect will the TIF have on other taxing districts, what type of developments should be funded, what resources are available to the municipality, and how does the estimate of incremental taxes compare to the cost to develop. Yes, I read that. Point blank. So timing considerations. For a TIF to be implemented, generally takes 180 days. It can be done in less time, yes, but by the time you have meetings and public hearings and notices, etc., that's about what it takes. The typical steps, here's what I just said. The public meeting, there can be a public meeting. So when the TIF was revised, the TIF Act was revised, there were other implementations put into effect. If there are more than 75 homes within the TIF district, you have to have a public meeting. Those residents within that area have to be notified. So that's what that is. If there aren't, you go forward without. But you have to have a joint review board where all the taxing districts come, and you have to have a public meeting. And there are time gaps in accordance with the Act that you follow with respect to those meetings. This is just more of the rules and regs as far as timing is concerned. I'm happy, as well as everybody else here, to assist you with questions. I know it's not an easy subject to absorb all within 10 minutes, but thanks for the 10 minutes.
So you said Governor Thompson, was it Governor Thompson, you said kind of created this thing?
Right.
So how many years ago was that?
I'm sorry.
So about 30 or 40 years ago?
78.
So a typical TIF is like 23 years, right?
Mhm.
So I'm just asking you your
That's okay.
experience here. You know,
I didn't do
how
TIFs
how,
then, by the way.
how successful are these? And I mean, and would you say, and I'm putting you on the spot here, if you have to renew a TIF, is that considered, you know, a failure?
Renew it. Extend the term?
Extend it,
Is it considered a failure? If you have to, if you want to renew it because you've got projects coming on, then I don't consider that a failure. There have definitely been some incredible success stories. There have been some failures. The Act says, however, if there's nothing that occurs within 7 years, the TIF must be terminated.
Well,
So there are stopgaps.
Thank you.
But it was a great question.
Can I answer that too?
If you have to.
I've been the TIF administrator for 11 TIFs. You have annual filings that are required with the Illinois Comptroller, and that's over 3 municipalities. Some of them have been incredibly successful. Others, nothing's really much happened to them. And others, one of which, in my preceding municipality, they bonded out. And I've been to ones where they're bonding out. Again, you get your money up front. Usually the bond market won't let you do it just with TIF revenues. It used to be that was the case, but now they expect you to back it with the full faith and credit of the village, or the city was my last place. And some of them are very successful. My last place, it was not, and the general fund was paying $1 million a year to back TIF bonds that were underwater. So that's why people are gun shy at going into bonds. But it's still a very useful tool. You just have to really, really do your due diligence. If there's ways to protect the village if you're going down that road. So it's everything in between. Very successful, a lot of nothing, and unsuccessful. And it really depends on the TIF, and it also depends on the timing of the TIF. We've had success, it all depends on an increase in the EAV. And a lot of that has to do with what happens within the TIF and the builders, but it also has to do with other factors.
Some of which we just went through for a number of
Correct.
years.
And the timing, we'll get that to there, but the timing of when the Pulaski TIF happened, the values of EAVs have dropped dramatically year after year after year ever since then, and that means that TIF is underwater. So we'll get to that. It doesn't mean that TIF can't be successful, but the bar is really, really high in those situations.
So underwater basically means that base EAV that we talked about, those parcels are dropping below that base. Now, it's important to note that when that happens, the taxing districts still receive that base. Mm-hmm.
Well, to the extent that base exists.
What kind of ramifications does the TIF have on our budget?
On the village's budget?
Yes.
Well, actually, I'll let you
Yeah.
answer, but virtually
Yeah.
none.
For the most part, the answer is none. The TIF monies are administered by the village. So as a village board, you are in charge of those TIF monies, but they're not village monies. They are monies belonging to the TIF. They can have some impact on the budget. Let's say, for instance, that you guys are going to be talking at some point of a water main on Pulaski Road that needs to be replaced. Now, had that TIF not existed, you'd be talking about that water main replacement that needs it in the water fund. So it can have a budget impact there, but TIF monies are their own. Each TIF is its own separate entity that you have control over but can't be mixed with village funds. So we have to budget for it, but you're budgeting for essentially a separate entity.
And
So-
remember, they can only be spent in that area.
And they can only be spent on that, but they can, we had a situation where,
Infrastructure can't.
right.
Yeah, no, there are some exceptions. There's exceptions.
Well, that's what I was going to lead up to another question, but where's this money coming from? I mean, when we offer it to a business, you said don't give away the store.
I'm going to, after Mary's done with sort of what are TIFs and how do they work, she gave you the basics, which is money comes in by improvements to that area, or in the world we're not living in, because EAVs are going up everywhere. They've been going the opposite way. But that's the general way monies get in. The Pulaski Road TIF is slightly different, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. And then there's a new taxing TIF district that has some flexibility. Basically the rule is if you touch another TIF, the word is contiguous, you can move monies from one TIF to another. So that's why two of these TIFs have slightly different. But in general, it's because the increase in property taxes go not to the village and the other taxing bodies, they go into the TIF. That's where monies come from.
And if they're here simply for improvements and additional revenues down the road, why are we restricted to districts such as Pulaski or Cicero? What if we...
Because the area does have to qualify. I mean, the area has to qualify, sorry. So there are a number of items that a TIF consultant like us, people like us, have to go through. I mean, when we come into a municipality, what we do is say, what are you looking to do? What are you trying to create? What is your goal? And what area do you want us to look at? We frequently say, give us your ultimate, and we go through the machinations of going through that area to see if, in fact, it qualifies. What are some of the qualifications? 3 out of 5 year lag in EAV, drop in EAV, 3 out of 5 year CPI lag, 3 out of 5 year of that area not keeping up with the rest of the village's EAV. Those are the biggies: deterioration, obsolescence, age, in particular, that we have here. Conservation area, the area, 50% of your buildings have to be 35 years or older.
When we designated the Pulaski TIF, we drew an area on the map of what that TIF covered, that area. So that becomes the TIF.
Right.
I wish I had grabbed a different map, because this one isn't all that easy to see. I didn't realize that was the one I was grabbing. This is Pulaski, all the way from 115 all the way to 123rd. It's on both sides of the street, and it's showing you the boundaries of where it was. And it's not just straight up and down lines. It's going around different pieces of property. And that was designed, as Trustee Dizelle was just saying, is to where it fit and where the needs were, where it fit the state statutes and the needs.
And rehabilitation. And that's an area where you want to utilize rehab funds. So as their taxes would go up, you could utilize those monies to assist them in rehabbing. Signage, parking lot rehab, roofing, all of those kinds of things that the Manheim Group are trying to go out and get people to buy into. I meant that in a good way.
So when they're successful, right? So the one that I'll hold up, this Mariano's at 111th, where I've read in the paper, where this is going to expire actually early. How does that happen?
Well, if a municipality has met all of the obligations within the TIF that they have set out for the TIF, they can terminate it early. There's nothing. As a matter of fact, every single one of our TIFs here say, if that happens, we will terminate early. Or if we have surplus, we will declare surplus, because you have to in accordance with the Act. So if you have uncommitted funds, you do that. In the case of 111th, where the Mariano's is, they've met their obligations.
So
the Chicago TIF, it'll be terminated early, huh?
If it's successful, again, those monies can be put back in there. It can be terminated early, or you can declare a surplus. And what declaring a surplus, at least in Cook County, means is the money goes back to Cook County, and then it's distributed back out in the same proportion as the property tax bill to all of the taxing bodies. It depends on which school district we're in, and as you guys might know, the school district actually is east side of the street and west side of the street of Pulaski are different school districts, and the southernmost part of that TIF is yet another school district. There's actually 3 elementary school districts in there. It depends, but essentially the village is around 14% of a taxing body. So let's say a surplus was declared, it would go back to Cook County, and the village now would receive 14%, whichever side it is, but about 14% of that money back. And all of the school districts and all the other taxing bodies, mosquito abatement, library, the rec, the park district, would all receive, community colleges, all of those would receive their, and Cook County Forest Preserve, all your taxes, all the stuff on your tax sheet when you get your property taxes, all of those would receive it in the same proportion. So there can be a surplus declared, or it can be terminated early, or the money can be used to pay back bonds or other redevelopment agreements, or it can be used for further development in that area.
What's been our history?
What's been our history?
We ever had a surplus?
Yes, we've declared surpluses multiple times. When the Pulaski TIF was first set up, there's not a requirement to have an intergovernmental agreement, and actually they're somewhat rare. They exist, but they're not in the majority of cases. In this case, the village of Alsip entered into an intergovernmental agreement and that with other taxing bodies, and as part of that, they declared a surplus in the adjoining TIF district, which was TIF 1, that's south of the Pulaski Road TIF, and that was it expired on December 31st, but that was in the east side of the street. That one declared at the time I think it was a $300,000 surplus, and then when that TIF expired late last year, the village finance committees, followed by multiple village board meetings, there was discussions about how that TIF should be winded down, what those monies should be used for, and as part of those discussions, there was some streets that are being finished right now in Arbor Glen and
Deer Park.
Deer Park. Those streets were refinished and are finishing up that. So that was where some of the money went. Some of the money went into the Pulaski because it's so underwater, it's not producing essentially any money. And then some was declared as a surplus. Now, some of that surplus it's actually on a delayed basis. And the reason for that, I don't want to go too much into the weeds, but people can protest their property taxes. And in general, if they protest the property taxes and the TIF has no money left in a bank account somewhere, there was just a court case that says the village has to pay it back. And it doesn't matter if those surplus monies went off mainly to the high school district, followed by the elementary school district, followed by everyone else. It doesn't matter that the monies went there. It's not coming from there. It's coming from the village. So villages and municipalities, I should say, have gotten very gun-shy about declaring all of that surplus all at once right at the end because they're on the hook for future property tax appeals, which can come through PTAB or through circuit court and can be years later.
And have been. We have one municipality that has a large PTAB that they got, and they did terminate the TIF fully, and they had no money in it. It was 14 years after the TIF was terminated that a PTAB came back, and they had to cough up $67,000. One development. So what municipalities have begun doing is exactly what Kent is saying, setting aside some of those monies. There's nothing in the act that says they can't do that. What you offer to the taxing districts is, let's enter into an intergovernmental agreement. If this happens, we'll share it proportionately. What we have heard is, we're not doing that. So the municipalities have said, okay, we'll keep it in this fund. If it happens, we have it. After a certain period of time, we'll let it go. Or we'll let it go, what's the word I'm
Incrementally.
Increment, add them there. So we let it go incrementally, which is also appealing.
What
So
is the typical amount of time that that money is held? 3 years, 2 years?
Well, there's
No.
one village now that's held it for 12. And it's I mean, they're nervous. It's a large industrial commercial TIF. And they've had protests already.
Which is what our TIF 1 mainly was, too. I mean, we have Deer Park and Arbor Glen, but it mainly was an industrial TIF. So there's some very large pieces of property in there that could come back and protest. Mary Thompson with Kane McKenna here and I spent a lot of time trying to come back and forth with where we thought, based on that TIF and TIFs in general, how we should release those funds. And we were probably a little too aggressive in releasing them because the village shouldn't just be holding on. We don't believe that. These are monies that should be back to wherever they need to go in all the different taxing bodies. We're not here to hoard anything. And so we're kind of a little bit of it's crossing our fingers. You know, you've got to balance the villages versus what's best for all of the taxing bodies in that district to provide the services they need. And we kind of balance that, maybe a little tip on the side of giving all the taxing bodies back. But the previous board passed, I think it was an ordinance, as to what that release would look like. It all starts after the final bills for that road resurfacing. I'd like to go for a second, unless there's more general questions.
No, but I'd like to just quickly remind the board as well, too. I mean, just my take on it. I've been here 6 years, and Kane McKenna's done a great job with helping us. Even at one point a few years back, we de-TIFed and re-TIFed an area over in Cicero Avenue. We had a potential development at the time, and we felt it important to support that area because it was a struggling spot that definitely has potential, but it was struggling over there at the same time. What's real important, trustees, is always what they were talking about a few minutes ago here, too, was the but-fors. You know, if not for the but-fors, meaning that if they couldn't get assistance on certain projects, that project might not happen without the assistance of the tax incremental financing, the TIF district, and so forth. So,
And I think, Mayor, you bring up such an excellent point because we're in Cook County here.
right.
And this is the only county that assesses property taxes the way they do,
Yes.
at a different level rate. So, I mean, this is basically, for Cook County anyway, it's to create a level playing field. We all know that all the other counties have TIFs too now, so, I mean, we're constantly clawing our way.
Exactly. And while, you know, I travel quite a bit in the area, and Kane County is one angle, all these different counties their tax level, I mean, obviously this is why you've seen Cook County, for their own reasons, I mean, they're taxing soda pop these days. They can do anything they have to bring in some funding right now. And on our end, we're having enough trouble keeping our head above water, as well as why we have these TIF districts. A more necessary tool, though, too, is aside from just assisting a business to come in, is certainly the end game is you're going to create some jobs. You know, you're actually going to have business come into town. This isn't just a structure we're going to look at, but this is going to create jobs. It's going to create sales tax monies. A lot of things will come from this and so forth then, too. So, I mean,
Shopping opportunities.
Pardon me?
Shopping opportunities.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. There's always an end game. There's always something down the road that you need to look at, not just what's in front of you. And Trustee Dalzell's done a great job at always reminding us, too, even with what we have available in the Pulaski Avenue TIF. And I forgot to recognize one of our property owners that is here this evening as well, that we want to help those existing property owners try and get to that same base and take advantage of the fact that you can enhance. It's a TIF-eligible expense, but you can enhance the facades of your buildings to make those more appealing to people to shop there and have more businesses there and so forth then, too. So aside from, like as Mary said, blighted is always a bad word to use, but what we want to do is actually, and that's enhance the area. And that's what we're doing right now with these property acquisitions that we're doing in one of our locations now then, too. And we're going to take out some old homes that are on a commercial street and so forth, and really trying to attract a great development at the same time. So,
So let's look at the history of the TIFs in the village. We have, first is TIF 1, and that, again, was 123rd to 127th Street. It kind of jogged around, but those were its northern southern boundaries, and it was east of Pulaski Road. That TIF started in October of 93, and TIFs last 23 years. There's the lag of property taxes makes it a little more complicated, but essentially it's 23 years. That one is finishing up some work on those two surfacing, and then there's going to be some surpluses released on a year-by-year basis after that. The next TIF is what we're now calling the northwest corner of Cicero Avenue and I-294. So that's what we call the McAllister property. Is essentially, it was larger, but that's what remains of that TIF. Again, we'll come back to it. There was a DTIF and RETIF, but that it's now defined as that, and that start date was in May 1st of 2002. Anyone needs any large machinery? Apparently, they're having a big sale on Wednesday. The Pulaski Road Corridor TIF is the one we're going to be talking more about. Its start date was officially October 18th, 2010. It was worked on before that, but that's its official start date. And as you know, the EAVs have dropped considerably since then. So we'll come back to that in a sec. And then the last one is the other part of the DTIF and RETIF. And it goes from the northern part of this northwest corner, and it gets immediately to the north of that, all the way up to what was the deluxe budget motel, and is now going to be the Red Roof Inn. It's still on that same west side of the street. It's south of 123rd Place. And its start date was in August of 2015. So those are the four TIFs that we have. Where we're spending our time right now is the Pulaski Road Corridor TIF. Again, the Pulaski Road is underwater. For the most part, it is not going to get any more money coming in because it is so underwater. The EAVs have dropped, I think, 6 or 7 years in a row now. And so there's no money coming into it, and there won't be. The exception to that is I kind of play around with the individual parcels in the TIF, and if something really nice gets built, I can get a little bit of increment on that, but it's got to make up where it went down below and then go beyond it. So it has to be considerably something nicer, and then there's a bit of a lag while I do that. Right now, I managed, when I got here, there was nothing coming in. We're almost up to $50,000 a year coming in. So there's a little bit. Unfortunately, some of that. Go ahead.
You did it to me, somebody do it.
Yeah,
Here,
absolutely.
turn around is fair play. So when you talk about the DTIF, RETIF in particular, you're talking about declining EAVs, like he said. What's happened here is that, again, only in Cook County do they look at the entire TIF instead of individual parcels as far as creating and or giving you back increment. So if you have a parcel that's generating increment and I don't, it doesn't matter. So what we've done is taken a little bit of our own little approach. We go to the county and ask them to put these severely underwater parcels in a separate tax code agency. And Kent has done that. But when you have that many that are underwater, it's hard to keep up. But again, just because it's Cook County, we have to take these extra steps.
Great.
Yeah, that's okay. She's right. Cook County is the only county left. There was 2 of them a year or 2 ago, but it's the only one left that still does it this way. But I've managed to get what little we can get to coming into there. As stuff improves, we might be able to get a little bit more. Some of that $50,000, just so you know, there's a redevelopment agreement, and some of that increment has already been pledged elsewhere. That redevelopment agreement also, by the way, handcuffs us from declaring a surplus, not that there's money coming in, until that redevelopment agreement has been fully paid off.
So why did you de-TIF the northwest corner? So it had basically 8 or 9 years left. So you de-TIFed it and re-TIFed it.
Yeah, what was happening was there was a complicated land deal that was being worked through, and had it gone through, it would have been a nice thing for the village. And in order for that to happen, it was too far underwater. Money had to come into the TIF. And so what they did was it was going to be a two-step process. They were going to de-TIF that portion, build, and then they were going to possibly, actually it turned out they may not have de-TIFed and re-TIFed the other portion. But you needed money coming into the TIF because the village was going to go out to bond, and you needed money coming back in to pay those bonds off.
Well, you say there's 7-year milestones or stopgaps or what have you. So between 2002 and 2016, to keep that thing alive, how did it meet the stopgaps?
I'm actually going to hand the microphone back to Mary because she's been here this whole time. But basically, something's been going on all along, potentially all along.
There actually was a lot of little rehab and small development projects going on. So we couldn't say that it didn't have anything going on.
Mary, weren't we told, too, at some point, that same contractor, the same developer, didn't he bring that to the board like in 2007 maybe? Something like that, too, as well?
Yes.
That's what I thought. I mean, it was before my time.
Yes.
But, yeah, and that's part of the reason, trustee, is why they did that, is that they had the same scenario, and it didn't fly at that point. And then when we felt they had more teeth in, like, 2014-15, is why we felt the need, as they said, to redo this in order to get more longevity out of it then, too.
But the analysis showed that we couldn't get enough increment to pay that.
Right.
So we went for the DTIF re-TIF. When we do a DTIF re-TIF, what we try to do is create a different boundary. So we did let some parcels go, as I recall. So they were not included.
I think that's why they segmented that with like you said, there's two of them over in that same corner of town. So.
Yes.
And Mary, to be fair, I lived in that TIF, so I
Sorry.
So my backyard is up against McAllister, so that's what I'm.
How fair do you want me to be?
Yeah.
So there is something interesting about as we're talking about the other taxing bodies, there is something interesting about these TIFs right now, especially the Pulaski TIF, which is where we're talking. Normally what happens with a TIF is frequently other taxing bodies are looking at these things very, very closely. Because what's happened, if you freeze an EAV and the property taxes they can receive, and the rest goes into the TIF, they say, okay, they have to wait 23 years from now, I'm going to receive more money, which is, by the way, what's happening in TIF 1. Their EAV in TIF 1 is going to go up considerably in another year, and it's going to be a lot of additional money coming into those. That's what we like to see in a successful TIF. Pulaski TIF is not there. Pulaski TIF is what we call underwater. It's below its base. So what happens is, as this money is spent in Pulaski, and especially if one project or another project does well, I'm going to pull those out to try to capture it. We're below the base. That means that increment is actually not going into the TIF until it gets really high up there. It's going back towards the taxing bodies. So it's an unusual situation that as it's improved right now, until it gets really further improved, which it may or may not see, it's actually benefiting the village of Alsip. It's benefiting 218. It's benefiting all of the underlying taxing bodies because they're not at the capped point. Their EAV dropped, and it's moving it back, raising that EAV back in there. So it's an unusual one that it can be benefiting those underlying tax bodies.
Yeah, so where does that deficit get made up from? I mean, if it's underwater, then how?
Because taxing bodies are still getting their money. So
the taxing bodies, they weren't clipped. The taxing bodies haven't been clipped is basically what happened. They weren't clipped by the TIF because there's no money coming into the TIF. That make sense?
No, not at all.
It's the reduction of the base. The base fell.
The base fell.
But the taxing bodies are at that base, so I mean, they're net winners, right? I mean,
No, if the base falls, they lose revenue.
So they fall with the EAV, even though they're
No, they don't. They get what
they
the
get
base was.
what they get what the base
So
was.
it's
So who
like
makes
when-
up the difference?
Okay, we do.
Village makes up the difference.
We as in who?
We,
We
the village. So if you protest your property taxes, and I live next door to you, over there, over by Dare McAllister, with Dan on the south side. You protest, I don't. Who's making up the spread? I am.
I am.
So it's the same thing, but it's proportioned to a vaster number, if you will. And you're not, pardon? It's everybody, right. Mhm.
Same thing.
But the base is the base is the base. And what Ken said earlier, too, is we have to remember, yes, 23 years. Yes, they're not getting the income generated, but they're not getting anything now. It's bleeding. So the concept is, nothing from nothing is nothing. If we don't do this, if we don't try and spur development, if we don't get development in here, we're still going to have nothing. And it's going to continue to deteriorate. Is it an ideal all around? No. Of course it has shortcomings. But it does have that stopgap to it.
There's one other thing worth mentioning. Right now, we've got 3 active TIFs. 2 of those TIFs have absolutely no residential property in it. One has, there's a few houses on Pulaski. What are we, 4? Something like that, houses on Pulaski. With those 4 house exceptions, nobody lives in these 3 TIFs combined. Well, the thing to remember about the money that comes into a TIF is that money came from property taxes within that TIF, and that money is to be spent in that TIF. There's an exception, of course, because some TIF 1 monies came into the Pulaski TIF. But right now where we're at is any monies being generated by the TIF go back to the TIF. And what you don't, with those 4 house exceptions, what you don't have is the residents of Alsip are not subsidizing these areas. The residents of Alsip, as you increase the amount of shopping and restaurants that are happening on Pulaski, those nice sidewalks and the banners that are leading to people, to businesses tearing down their old buildings and building new stuff, that is stuff that did not come from the property taxes of the residents of Alsip. That came from the property, those are coming from, the TIF monies come from TIFs, and they're just spent back towards TIFs. So it's not, going back to the question, I think, Trustee Pierce, I think it was you, it may have been someone else, it may have been Trustee Zielinski, who asked about, I think it was you, a budget. This isn't the village's money. The village is managing TIF monies. This did not come from the village as a whole. It came from TIFs. So we don't want to confuse the two. It's really easy because your oversight oversees both things, but this did not come from the village as a whole. The exception would be if you did issue bonds. You're backing by the whole village's taxing power. But you have no outstanding bonds, just so you know, in any TIF. You have no TIF bonds. TIF, if you want to know Pulaski TIF, the numbers are, there's about $3.4 million in there right now. There's about $5.1 million in immediate sort of projects that could be spent. There's some other projects that, may or may not go. There's about almost $50,000 a year coming in. So it's a limited number of resources. There is not a giant bucket. There's not more money coming in. There's not a giant bucket where everything can be spent. You're going to have to use these for best dollar. And luckily for us, we have two consultants who are doing nothing but trying to help you guys decide where those best dollars should be spent, since they are a limited resource. And it's not like most TIFs where more monies are coming in. And Chris Mannheim and Roger Hopkins, who are waiting in the wings here.
If you got $50,000 a year coming in the one TIF, what do you have coming in on the other two TIFs?
Marginal. I think it really is dependent on the year. I think I managed to pull one pin on one of those into its own category and above water. For 3 or 4 years, it was zero. I think it's 20,000, 30,000. I can't remember.
But a case in point is that we have a new owner of that hotel. Do we not, Mayor?
We do.
For on Cicero?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, Red Roof.
So we're anticipating that a major renovation will be going on.
I don't think that's tip.
You know what? It's last week when I met with the gentleman last Monday is how I direct him to you. I have not seen his application if he wants to participate.
I talked with him, but
Right.
haven't heard anything else.
Okay, and that's the thing too is if you want to participate in a TIF, you need to do that sooner than later because, again, we have to qualify if we want to participate. Now, you can't just do the work and then ask us to come back after which.
They got to do it before the construction starts.
Right.
Yeah, they have to do it before construction. I'm seeing construction out there right now.
So
Already
there-
demolished some stuff.
Is that 3.4 million exclusive of the 300,000?
That's the tough part right now because the bills are coming in sort of fast and furious. We're at 3.55, but we're trying to figure out. I'll be able to give you a better number once Deer Park and Arbor Glen, all the bills have come in. They haven't come in, so we're trying to do some estimation.
Well, the 300,000 that we declared as the surplus, is that
I believe we already did that. So no, I'm sorry, that is
over the
not.
next 5 years?
Yeah, the 3.4 is what actually the 300,000 was at the very beginning of the TIF. So the and that was actually in TIF 1. So there's no Pulaski TIF surplus declared.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so that's, we think there's 3.4 is essentially where we're at. We'll be able to tell you more pretty soon. But potentially 5.1 in projects. There could be new projects coming on that demand more. We're just not, that's where we're at. And again, I think when you're ready, if there's no more questions from Mary or myself, we can have Chris and Roger.
The Red Roof Inn, what TIF does that fall into? Should they apply?
The Red Roof Inn is the 123rd place in Cicero Avenue. Again, there has to be an application made. It has to be before construction happens. They have to prove a but-for. That ship may have sailed.
That ship may have sailed. You are absolutely
That
right.
ship,
Revenue hasn't.
right. Now there is, and I won't be naming it, but we had a number of businesses on Pulaski, restaurants on Pulaski that have either remodeled or torn down and remodeled or relocated. One of those came to us and asked for TIF money, but they did after their ship had sailed. And because their ship had sailed, they basically proved there's no but-for. I mean, the but-for basically said, hey, I want to do this. I can't quite make it work. I could do it but for this money I need, which will be something we'll be talking about on the tail end of Chris and Rogers, because we have an applicant we're talking about today, and then we'll have another applicant as you make the decisions on that, another applicant that we'll be talking about next Tuesday on the 30th. Is there any more questions for Mary or myself? If we have time at the end and you're not overwhelmed, we have Mary Schmidt here as well. There is another economic development tool she is chomping at the bit to tell you about. But if you're overwhelmed, she's more than willing to come back another day and tell you about another economic development tool.
And real quick also, just for clarification, because this meeting is being taped and so forth on our village website. But again, for the benefit of everybody that's watching it, when the finance director, when he says when that ship sailed, meaning that when someone gets into a full-blown development and didn't ask for the but-for, in other words, I couldn't have this project happen if not for your help, they've already demonstrated that they have a full-blown contract, they've already got everything going on, they have not demonstrated that they need our assistance to do so. So that's what that ship sailed, that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, we weren't building a harbor, I'm sorry.
Right. I just, I know sometimes we can all read between the lines, but we want to be very clear to everyone that listens to this meeting then.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
How do you vet these projects?
Ah, what a great lead-in. Here we go.
Yeah, so that's the Mannheim Group can address this.
How do you vet them before somebody says?
Good evening. I'm Chris Mannheim and Roger Hopkins, my key collaborator here. I'm going to start out with something very general to explain the process to you so that when Roger gets up, you'll have a better idea what happens with the application itself. Back a year or so ago, we were originally hired to put together a marketing plan for the Pulaski TIF. Roger put together a great plan for that, and he can talk about that a bit later. But that would be so that we're not just grabbing whatever happens to fall out of the sky, as a lot of economic developers would tell you, but that we are being very focused and targeted on the kind of businesses that we know should be successful on Pulaski Road, and we are only contracted to work on Pulaski Road at this time. Now, after that, it was determined that there wasn't really a process in place, an application or even a process, and I need to just quickly go through this. This form was one of your attachments in your email, and it needs to have some additional modifications. I'll work with Erica as she gets settled in, and we'll get the forms completed and updated completely, and then we'll also make sure that they're changed on the website. So what we have is a process, because there wasn't a clear process in place up until this past year. The first thing that we would happen, and we're working with two different kinds of businesses, property owners. So essentially working with people that already have businesses, or they are property owners, or both. And that's typically referred to in economic development parlance as business retention and expansion. And then you have those that we're out actively recruiting to bring into the community. Companies that maybe are developers and maybe buying property. So the first thing typically, and let's just work with the businesses that are here and the two applicants that you're going to be hearing from this week and next week, typically they would obtain an application, a TIF application, which we developed with the Economic Development Committee this past year, off the website, as well as this form. The second thing is that there really is not an application fee. The village board last year determined that they should waive that fee at least for existing property owners. So, but if you're an outside owner, you would still pay the $500. The second part of this is the application review. And that's essentially what Roger and I do in consultation with the mayor, and then in consultation with the Economic Development Committee. And with the other staff people such as Kent, or if we need Mary Thompson's expertise, we talk to Mary. Mary Schmidt over at the Chamber, and the Enterprise Zone is another one of the advisors. And that's where we work with them to complete the application, particularly can they start this project on their own, or do they need the but-for without your assistance? And a lot of times, too, as it's been explained more than enough tonight, that but-for is extremely important. And a lot of times it's that, we could do a project, but we can enhance it with assistance from the village. So when we're happy at our level with the application, that's then when we send the application to the Economic Development Committee for review. And in this particular case, John, we have, our mayor, I should say, we have the board, the board as a whole doing the review tonight. But this process would typically be just with the Economic Development Committee. Yeah.
Interrupt for just 1 second.
Yeah.
If you're trying to see what he's looking at, it's actually on your computer. If you go to on the top right, there's something, the bookmark. It's a little rectangle with a thing. Right. If you click the very last one, you'll be taken to page 57 of 57. That's the page he's holding up if you want to see it in front of you.
Right, that's one I was referring to in your packet. I didn't expect you to be reading this along with me.
Oh, no, everyone's got hard copies of this yet,
We do
too.
have hard copies. Thanks, Kent, though. That's a good point. Then the fourth step is that once it's reviewed by the Economic Development Committee, it then receives a recommendation up, yay or nay, to go to the village board. And if it goes to the village board with a positive recommendation, then you would vote on it. Then a redevelopment agreement would be put into place, and so on and so forth. One other handout I'm going to do is put down the microphone for a second. Monthly, the entire board receives a monthly progress report from Roger and I, and I'll just hand these out because chances are you've never seen this. This was the report that we passed out to the board on the May 1st meeting, and this is going to set it all up, and then I'm going to segue over to Roger, and he'll take it from here. John, I'm going to give you one anyway.
Yes.
Thank you.
Should have enough for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I probably got it. Thanks.
I won't dawdle on this, but this way, there's no guessing as to what we're working on and the like. So, for example, we have a number of active TIF applications in place. Alsip lawnmower was approved. One other footnote I should mention is that there are several applications or businesses that were trying to put in applications as much as 2 or 3 years ago. And, for example, Alsip lawnmower had first talked to the village back in 2014. There's also another application that you're going to be hearing about next week for the strip mall owned by RD Land Ventures. That goes back to 2014. So we're still doing cleanup from the last TIF administrator and TIF marketing person. And those guidelines were not clear at all at the time. In fact, there were no written guidelines. So now we have this process in place, we have a real application, and then we also have this monthly report. Roger is going to be leading into talking about the checkers application tonight. A couple other things, too, that we have discovered that we don't have in place that you'll see on here at bullet number 3, facade improvement guidelines. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but we'll be talking to it in the next couple of meetings. Roger has gone through the various plans that are put together. One is referred to as shorthand as the Hitchcock Report, which was done about 2013 on some guidelines. The businesses we have found out as we've been talking to them, we don't have any clear guidelines for developing facades, and that's one of the key interests of most of the businesses with enhancing their buildings. Some of the other applications that are currently in place, I mentioned the RD Land Ventures. You'll be hearing about them from next week.
Can you impose facade guidelines on chains?
What's that?
Can you impose facade guidelines on national chains? Say McDonald's.
Yeah.
Really?
You'd be surprised when you're working, and Roger probably has these stories too. By the way, we've both been doing this for 40 years each, plus.
But don't they have an image that they have?
And we have seen this at all. And when you talk to, for example, McDonald's or somebody, they have a book, yay thick, with any number of different kinds of stores and signs that you can have to meet almost any kind of planning and zoning guideline that you can think of.
And if we had a height restriction,
but you have to ask them.
Then they have it in their book already, most likely.
Yeah, and the key is with so much of this, Roger can tell you even better than I can. If you don't ask, they'll just go along and do what they think they want to do and as quickly as they want to do it in the life. But if you push them a bit during negotiations, yeah, they have different guidelines and the like. And small businesses, though, are the ones that you really want to be concerned with. So between the Hitchcock design guidelines, which give you basic concepts for redeveloping the Pulaski corridor, but there's other things we can do in conjunction with some of the funding, and we've talked to Ken about this too, possibly. for architectural review and whatever. All those are TIF eligible expenses. But the village needs to give particularly a lot of our independent businesses some guidelines. You can take a look at some of these others. I don't need to review each and every one of these. In fact, if you notice, the report is marked confidential. We don't like to go through these until, at least publicly, until we have an actual application in play. But you can see some of the different businesses that are here, and you can talk to Roger or I individually about those. Some of the other things, too, and Roger can comment on this more if you have questions, because he's been handling the property acquisitions along with a couple of the other consultants they'll be working with from CB Richard Ellis. So there are properties, too, that are blighted. One of them was originally purchased with the car wash. There's 2 or 3 other properties that we're also in the process of purchasing. The whole point is have the whole corridor with one look, being able to market it, being able to assemble properties so that they're going to be useful to somebody or usable by some prospect that we're trying to bring into play. Roger, I can turn it over to you at this point.
Okay. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the specific application that we've got pending that is going to require a decision by the village board in order for them to decide whether or not to proceed before June 1. Jennifer Lasota is here representing the owners, which are identified in the packet as Baver and Feza Reza. And what they have is they have a contract to purchase the old Checkers location, which was a title loan business before that. As a title loan business, they used the same building that a Checkers originally had occupied, maybe several years ago. Some of the considerations as you go down through this list is, how do we review and qualify prospects for the corridor. First of all, we're looking at businesses that have a likely opportunity to succeed in that corridor. And we put together the retail development and marketing plan for the village and for the TIF district and the Pulaski Road corridor. And one of the key businesses we think are capable of being successful are quick service and fast food restaurants. And that's been proven by the success that we've had already with Burger King, McDonald's, and then recently with Taco Bell and Dunkin' Donuts. Now this project, as you get down through the list of other fast food restaurants, there are going to be other ones with challenges. When you want to redevelop the property, they have to acquire the property and then remodel it and restore, in the Checkers case, its ability to function as a restaurant from having been an office building, and all the restaurant equipment was kind of cleaned out of the property. So they've identified the cost as one of the obstacles for it, and it's over $1 million, almost $1.1 million, to redevelop the property for both building rehabilitation, re-equipment, and to start up the enterprise. One of the other risks which the village has and the TIF district has is the burden of carrying a current property tax bill of $40,000 per year. The average for other fast food restaurants, Burger King and McDonald's, is $62,000 a year. They both have buildings that are 2.5 times larger than Checkers. If we watch that property tax income fall, it's going to impact not only the village but the TIF district negatively. So preserving that $40,000 is important, not so much to add increment to the district, but just to preserve it for the underlying taxing districts and to protect the village. And if they're willing to come into the restaurant and swallow that, that's a real asset for the village, because they're paying almost $40 a square foot, which is more than most other businesses are paying in the village. And so that's a big hurdle for them to overcome from an operating cost standpoint. Now the but for is that they have not bought the property yet. We contacted the broker that represents the franchise business, Checkers generally, and then they put us in touch with the franchisee, which would buy the property. And he has a contract to purchase the property. He's told us through the application that he won't follow through with opening the restaurant and purchasing the property if he doesn't get TIF assistance. So we've met with them, with village staff, and reviewed what the circumstances of the needs are, and we have to be able to qualify whatever assistance the village provides as eligible costs, and that'll be screened by Kent's office and reviewed with Mary Thompson as time goes on. And some of the benefits are, if this building gets converted back into a restaurant use, it's going to generate more sales tax than it ever has as a office use. The likelihood of another non-franchised restaurant or non-national brand restaurant opening up in this location usually means that its likely revenues are going to be even lower than the lowest projection for a national franchise business. And I've looked at this. You have some rare instances where a locally run business will generate the same kind of revenues, but most of the time you can only count on maybe about half of the revenue generation of a national chain by operating it as a local restaurant. So recognizing that, we've got one opportunity really to restore a national chain to this location that'll generate the kind of revenues that Checkers will on what is otherwise a somewhat substandard lot relative to what McDonald's and Burger King occupy already, or somebody else that might come into the business, whether it's a Panera Bread, a Wendy's, or somebody else of that nature. And it's going to generate some new jobs. So you've got sales tax revenue, you've got new jobs, new income into the community, and you're preserving the property tax base. So I guess through the process of negotiation and discussion, we're recommending that the village board consider a grant to the owners of the franchisee that would be reimbursed to them after they prove they've undertaken and paid the eligible expenses. And we're recommending a grant of $295,000, which is a percentage of the remodeling costs, a percentage of the site improvement costs, a percentage of the job training costs, and some of the heating, ventilating, and other eligible expenses. But they would have to show us that they've spent that money before the village would actually reimburse them and pay them for it. And their objective is to be in business by the end of August. So this is a pretty quick turnaround. This is a quicker turnaround than you usually see with demolition and new construction. So that's the other benefit of this particular application. So we're recommending some qualifications about, we would like them not to appeal their property tax, payments. One of the accommodations we're trying to make to them is that if they see a dramatic increase in their property taxes, we would want to be notified that they're appealing them so that we could submit our evidence, to at least justify what they should be paying. And hopefully they'll preserve that existing property tax payment. So,
Mr. Hopkins?
I'm ready to answer questions.
Oh, yeah. Roger,
yep.
Now, if for any reason, let's say, for instance, and I like the presentation. I had the opportunity, I had the pleasure of meeting with Ms. Lasota and the owners a few weeks ago. But I wanted to just clarify for the board as well. If we were to come through with this proposal, we can still, let's say this business really takes off, and it hasn't been there for a number of years, and it's already been built and designed specifically as a Checkers, because that's what was. How long was it a title company? I actually don't know off the top of my head. When was Checkers last represented there?
Mary?
Okay.
I don't know. I think it was a title company for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And then you had the Title Max come in, and they left, and it was vacant between Checkers and the title company, and then it's, of course, been vacant
Okay.
several years now.
So what I was going to ask was, basically it's a national chain, and based on the paperwork that we've been given, hopefully this really takes off as well, because it identified a number of locations in the area participating with checkers right now as well then too. Let's say this project really takes off for this family, and let's say they sell the business in 3 years because they're doing so well, and somebody wants to buy this franchise. We can still attach our numbers onto that next person too, to the building, right?
I think what the mayor is asking, we do need to quickly have some discussions between the village and the owners, using both sets of attorneys to talk about. We've had preliminary discussions. We did not arrive at the final discussion about property tax appeals. If property taxes get too high up there, it's going to affect them being able to operate a business because margins are thin on restaurants. However, what the village doesn't want to do is put a lot of money in and see the property tax appeals by the applicant come back. The village is given money to try to maintain property taxes, and immediately there's property tax appeals. So there looks to be some sort of a redevelopment agreement that has to be worked out as to where that dollar amount is, how long it lasts. And I think what the mayor is asking, and I correct me if I'm wrong, would that follow should either the franchise or, more importantly, the owner of the underlying asset sell to somebody else? And with a redevelopment agreement, it's my belief that follows the property.
Well, there are ways to lock it up a little bit too. You could, within that redevelopment agreement, have an assignation clause whereby, they can't assign the full benefit. In other words, some of it has to come back to the village. So, there are ways to tighten it up a little, especially within a time period like you're saying. If it's 10 years, it's...
Right, and we talked to them. Sure. They do not want to tie up the asset in terms of something like a second mortgage. They don't want to go down that road. That's one of their conditions. So we were trying to talk about other ways to get there, and preventing property tax appeals under certain conditions is, I think, where we would end up going.
How do you write something like that? Is this a handshake?
I call my attorney. When I said it was to both sides through their attorneys.
Right, but so you write this thing. Of course, there's got to be numbers put in that, with a certain percentage or something. It goes up to $500,000. You're being facetious here, and you've got an agreement that says you're not going to appeal it. Of course,
there's a threshold.
There's a dollar threshold, and there's a number of years, and we're pretty much there, but we need to work with the attorneys. We need to work with the consultants. We're going to work with me, frankly, and then we work with their side in figuring out what that dollar amount is and how far. We can't make it so high that this isn't going to bring a ton more money into the TIF district like you would normally want to see when you're looking at expending these kind of TIF monies. Because their margins are so thin, Roger mentioned this, but I want to reiterate. This is a thin lot. As you go through the Pulaski TIF, a lot of the TIF lots are very difficult lots, either because they're shallow on one side of the street and further north, or they're very thin. This is a very thin lot. It makes it very difficult to do something with. As of now, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, I believe that $40,000 is still coming in. That is unusual because it is now vacant. Should there not be a business coming in that pays that $40,000, that is going to be refiled at the county as vacant, and that the amount of property taxes coming in is going to be lost. So in most situations with TIF, you want to see a very large increment jump up because you want money to come into the TIF because it's above the base. This is below the base to begin with, but it will drop dramatically further if there is nobody in that property and it's properly filed as vacant property. So this is more of trying to maintain what's there and some sales tax coming in on a very difficult piece of property.
I just don't understand how you make it binding when you don't appeal to Mayor Ryan, you appeal to Joseph Barrio's office. So
Because you have a redevelopment agreement. There's a redevelopment agreement that will follow the property. So we have, just so you know, there's one redevelopment agreement on the Pulaski Corridor TIF. That allowed the Family Dollar to be built. That's a different kind of redevelopment agreement than the one we're talking about now. But that binds the village in certain ways, and that binds that property holder. It was the developer at the time in certain ways. The same would be true with this one. It would bind the property owner, not under the conditions listed, not to appeal the property taxes.
It becomes a recorded document, so it goes, with the land. So the PIN number is recorded.
But the redevelopment agreement is with the village, not with the county.
But it's still recorded with the county.
It becomes a piece of testimony and evidence that goes into the consideration that the property tax appeals process has to take into account.
Should a PTAB show up, we'd show up with that document pretty quickly.
And what Mr. Alvin just brought up, and I had that on my list here too, that's probably one of the bigger points for me, is right now it's kind of surprising that the title store never appealed those taxes to reduce those down to a vacant land type of thing. Otherwise, we'd be getting just marginal tax money off that as opposed to the $40,000 that we're even getting now. Should that happen, pardon?
Yeah.
Oh, they're from out of town? Okay. But we've seen other properties on Pulaski that we're getting just marginal dollars from and so forth, and that's why they seem so appealing all the time. But this really doesn't affect their budgets greatly. This does. I mean, if this development were not to happen, and it works against us at some point then too. This really hurts us, especially when this restaurant's already been designed for this particular application, and this really could be a saving grace in that particular little corner. That's all.
There's another consideration besides just the loss of property taxes that make this one unusual. Normally, this size, I'm not advocating this dollar amount for this size and for, frankly, a restaurant. But this one, you have something that, frankly, still looks like a Checkers. Mm-hmm. They're going to do facade changes. Checkers no longer has that same look. It's slightly different, so some of this money is going to facade. But if you have a vacant property that is so visible, and frankly, that one is really visible, it's an eyesore in the thing, not only in the whole area. So you would probably at someday be putting TIF money towards demolition and or property acquisition. We don't have to go down that road should you decide that this is the project that you want, or if it's not the project you want, if some other development gets in there, but it's a fairly high risk. The time-wise for the one applicant is coming up. Doesn't mean that should you reject it, another applicant couldn't come along, but right now you've got bird in hand, as it were.
So this Checkers, this facade that's there right now is a 1990s facade. So I looked into this a little bit, and Checkers has a new, what they call Vision 2020, a whole new, standard that new openings, are gearing to a whole new look and everything. So it's going to be
If you go to page 1 of your packet, it's the cover.
This is pretty much the concept. The drawing or the picture that's in there shows what the building will look like. Although this is their prototype, but it is being remodeled because of some of the conditions that are existing that are there. So there's also a set of drawings, full architecturals, that were included in the package as well that show the renovations and how they're going to. So the stainless bubble that used to be on there is now being removed, and there's a new facade that goes on. They are going to keep the stainless panel that was painted out, I think yellow. They're going to, the stainless still remains, and the new building, or the retrofit of the building, will not have this kind of arc on it, a little bit of a V that comes in, and they're just going to basically take the overall image and take a lot of I think the biggest issue is you will not see how this kind of has that little wing flipping up. It'll be the stripe. They're going to take the existing the canopy facades and utilize the lines of them. But the checkered tiles and the stainless and the new parapet that's going on and the new sign.
How they ask us this, so if you're to say
And the old design had a double drive-through. The new design
if you were
only has a
doing
single.
25,000 annually,
And there's no indoor seating anymore.
that's
Right, well,
12 years.
right, there really was, Checkers as a whole never really had a lot of seating in there. They might have had a couple of like stand-up tables. Most of their seating occurred on the outside in those little pad- they had a patio area.
Right.
And in this one, yeah, there's not, it really hasn't changed that much. They're not, still not gonna have, they're not geared towards that. They really, their concept is really more for a drive-through concept. They will have some tables on the outside, in a little patio area that they,
The idea is
the site is the site is very small. It's, I think, roughly 19,000 square feet. And so the fact that, one of the main reasons why they came back to this site was because of it previously did have Checkers on it.
20 total
And,
employees.
from, speed to being able to get this up and running as quickly as possible, it's an advantage to them. When they started looking at it, the biggest deterrent was the fact that the real estate taxes were coming in at $40,000 a year. I mean, it took the rents and basically put them at what you're paying in downtown Chicago, in Lincoln Park area at $65 a square foot, which is you just couldn't make the numbers work. And so, they've basically said, really, and have proved that if they didn't have the TIF, it's just not going to go forward. They just can't afford to pay that. So,
Very good. Gentlemen, I appreciate the outline that you gave everyone here as well. This is really done well to explain the benefits as well as the concerns at the same time, or with, like we said, with the should we lose this opportunity to have Checkers there, what we face, what's the residual effects of this, and so forth. Then too. So, trustees, as the Mannheim Group suggested, this was an overview this evening to understand not only how TIFs work, but that we have a current project like this that we're trying to help the property owner facilitate their mortgage company. They're closing on, if they were to close on this mortgage, it's Jennifer, it's June 1st, right?
They waive due diligence. Contractually, they have to waive their due diligence by June 1st, and then they're going to close very quickly right after that.
I get it. Okay.
So their money goes hard, and basically.
And that's the thing, trustees, is our next board meeting wouldn't be until June 5th. So we're going to see what if we're interested in doing this, we can certainly put this as an action item at next week's committee meeting, because typically we don't vote at a committee meeting, but we can put this subject on for consideration at that meeting.
Or as a special board meeting.
Or a special board meeting.
See which way.
Right, whatever it takes to follow our committee meeting.
That's the last, just so you think about it, Tuesday is May 30th. They have to make a decision by June 1st. So Tuesday night is as late as you can possibly make this.
Right.
It's to the deadline.
And
So if there's questions before that, it's really important that you talk to the mayor, talk to myself, talk to Roger, talk to Chris, and I'll answer, if you call this weekend, if you call, whenever you call, I will get back to you if you have questions on this, because we are in that tight timetable. We can't delay. It can be yes, it can be no, but it can't be let's delay this after Tuesday.
And trustees understand, too, that we did meet, Jennifer, what was that, at least 3 weeks ago, right? So, and we did explain to the owners that they just hit us at a weird time. It was just awkward. It was certainly not to pressure anybody or anything like that, but we did have a new board coming out. We want everyone to be comfortable with what we're going to do, and just obviously with the loan that they established, it just hit us at an awkward time. So we're doing what we can to try and help facilitate that. Is all.
If there's any
Do you have
questions.
an estimate on what's the total square footage of that tip?
I'd have to look at the plan, it would be acreage. The plan generally states on the acreage.
Yeah,
I don't recall.
it's definitely acreage, right.
I'm just curious what this parcel is, what percentage of it is.
Oh, it's really tiny.
It's a very small percentage.
I believe this is it right here. This really, really thin square right there, rectangle right there, in the whole thing. It's probably, frankly, maybe one of the smallest dots on here. It's insignificant compared to the whole.
So about how many businesses in that TIF right now have already received TIF funds?
Not many. Yeah, I'm trying to think.
None.
None.
And that's, Trustee Pierce, that's where it comes back to the but for. Did they need assistance going in, like a McDonald's or a Burger King and so forth, a lot of times, depending on their situation, I don't know if it's a franchise or not, but a lot of times they've already got a plan in hand, and they didn't demonstrate the need to participate in a program like this. Obviously, this owner did, so that's why we're considering this.
There's an asterisk to none. Technically, Trustee Giselle is right. However, there was a lip that was causing some real problems going in and out of the jewel because of a resurfacing that was done at Jewel's strong urging.
That was because of our failure to check the engineering when that went in there originally. We should have never, ever, ever allowed that to get passed. We spent $250,000 to fix something that somebody screwed up, and we didn't catch it.
Predates me, thank God. But it was a strong urging of one business. The Family Dollar, yeah, the Family Dollar. But that was done with TIF money, Family Dollar.
That was the RDA, though.
I'm sorry. The other thing, too, is Jennifer mentioned that their due diligence period is expiring. Part of their due diligence list, if you will, states that unless they receive a favorable redevelopment agreement with the village. So that is a subjective term on their part, but without it, they're basically saying but for. Roger and Chris have basically done an analysis of the numbers, and that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that what you're doing is a fair return. They're investing X, you're giving them Y. So it's public-private partnership.
I'm just looking at, my question, I think, is more geared around fair division of the available funds.
Funds, right.
So, Mary, Ken said we had $3.4 million in funds. This would be about 9% of those available funds. So I'm just trying to gauge, is that a fair?
Well, but the one other thing to consider is that this TIF has been active for a couple of years now.
Right.
And the number of people who have actually submitted a TIF application has been 3.
But the list you just gave us says that it's going way up. Or is that just a potential list?
I think it's potential.
There was roughly 9, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what I'm gauging my question against, is that big list that he just
Right.
gave us.
And we
that's
have
been the difficult part is that as we've been trying to get into this, and certainly they've done a great job of modeling the application process, but the initial aspect of it was charge some money to a person to get in. That way they kind of have a buy-in to it rather than free, skin in the game. The downside is that here we are, we're looking to give $3.4 million to businesses as an enticement to beautify, to come in, to remedy, to whatever, Pulaski Avenue. So we're going to charge $500 to a business to give them money. Just didn't make sense. So that's where we kind of pulled back on that for the existing businesses, as has already been pointed out, while still holding some monies out there for people just so they're not going out there and saying, hey, how much can I get? because there's a lot of work that's involved with it.
Can I say just a couple more things? One of the things we're trying to do is sustain the momentum that we're creating on the corridor to create more increment in the future. Now, we've created a budget that says we can fund maybe about 10 or 15 projects out of the $3.4 million that's there. Now, there will be more money that could be produced if the increments continue to build in the future. Now, this isn't going to generate any increment, but two of the other redevelopment lots that we're talking about acquiring are generating about $20,000 a year in property taxes, but we believe they've got the potential to generate $60,000 to $70,000 in property taxes each. And then there could, and we hope that that will continue to create a domino effect. Now, not all of those still have 14 more years to pay increment on. By the time they redevelop it, they may only have 10 more years, but that's still 10 more years of, $40,000 times 10, or maybe it's 8 more years times $40,000, for a couple of projects. So.
Combination of taxes.
Right.
You have sales taxes, which, as you well know, goes right into the general generated from this project. You have to kind of weigh it all, put it all in the basket.
I can think of a couple other, they weren't applications, but the streetscape stuff, there's a number of projects that happen without TIF funds. And Roger's talking about momentum. Some of that may or may not have to do with the fact that the streetscape has been greatly improved using TIF funds. Another one that wasn't an application, and whether it should have been done or not been done, it wasn't done as an application, was the demolition of that grocery store. With the demolition of a grocery store. Now, that one was unusual, and whether it should have been done or not been done, I'm not going there. But it was that they actually did apply for and receive the demolition of that grocery store, and as soon as that became a lot, that's when you saw the interest in the Taco Bell, and I'll leave it to the experts. I'm repeating what they told me, so if you want to know more about this, you'll have to ask them. But people won't come in and acquire lots and demolish property. They expect to see more of something flat to start with.
And for new development.
For new development.
For new development, yes. That's why you want to have control of the property. So you don't want to be land bankers, so don't misunderstand the statement. Oh my God. You don't want to be land bankers, but you also want to have control of parcels while you're doing this heavy marketing. Part of the problem is you now have guys that are out there marketing your TIF. And that's what you have to have. You have to have somebody going out and stating what the benefits are, encouraging people to renovate their property, because, you want to create that aura along that corridor. Hence, you have some restrictions. We're talking about sign heights, all of those kinds of things. There's one community that I work with, my God, restrictions are a little too tight. You can only purchase certain lamps for your building. You can do that via ordinance for that tip.
Right.
Roger? Something that Mary brought up and I wanted to bring up too is that you take a look at the report that we put together. Under considerations, again, take a look at the kind of sales tax that are going to be generated. You're looking at $16,000 to $20,000 annually from the new business, and then possibly that could be up to $24,000. So you start putting that numbers in over 10 years, you've got your money back. And even some of the other projects that you're going to be hearing about, for example, one of them that was what I'm calling the legacy projects, that the applications that were out there. One of them you're hearing about next week, where there were the village had previously talked to some of these the existing property owners. A lot of it is upgrading buildings and parking lots and the like that go back to the 1950s. And they just don't fit today's market. So a lot of that is not just putting lines or maybe sealer on a parking lot as an example. You're going to be hearing more about some of these small projects. They don't cost a lot of money, but they're going to be tremendous enhancements that the owners can't necessarily do on their own. So all this fits in. So don't only take into consideration just what money's in the TIF budget. Take into consideration what we're trying to do in job generation, sales tax generation, and the like. So it all adds up very quickly, and you have to look at it over a 10-year period, not just from year to year.
I want to go back to something Trustee Pierce was asking about, and Roger and Chris were talking about how many projects. There is one project out there that's pretty big in proportion to the amount of money that there exists, and it's a public works project. It's the water main replacement for a good portion of one side of the street. It's in pretty bad shape. If you don't provide quality water to businesses, a lot of businesses won't show up. You know, you've got to have a consistent form of water, or a restaurant can't stay in business, etc. So that project is something we're going to be talking about in the budget process. It would be $144,000 of engineering in year one, and it would be $1.2 million project. That's a large portion of $3.4 million. I just wanted to state that there is also potential. There's also other potential public works projects, including Outlot, supplying water and sewer to Outlot at Jewel. I'm just talking the way that the previous board, not that you guys are the previous board looked at one and said we'd like to be doing that. Looked at the other, said not right now until there's some interest. They made no commitment, so it's entirely in your hands, not theirs. But I did want to say it's not just facades, it's not just new businesses coming in. There are other types of things that these monies can be spent for as well. And those are two of them that are out there.
Very good. Trustees, any more questions on TIFs or this project? Now, right now, that's the thing, you know, and that's why I brought to the next item, folks, that we had on our agenda this evening. I had listed as number 2, Mary Schmidt from the Chamber of Commerce is here to discuss the Cal-Sag Enterprise Zone. And actually, Mary, when we met in my office last week, we had said, you know, if we felt there was a lot of download here, maybe we could postpone that till next week. Would you be okay with that if we did that?
Fine.
Okay, because I think there was a lot of download here. Absolutely, Mary. Absolutely. Come on.
I'm going to put my Chamber of Commerce.
My Chamber of Commerce hat, and having done some economic development in the village, assisted over the years, I'm excited to see what's finally starting to happen on Pulaski. It's looking better. You have businesses that are on Pulaski that have made their business look better, like the Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, McDonald's, without any TIF funds. Even the Taco Bell. You know, we tore down an old nasty-looking grocery store. We have a new Taco Bell there. I think in this particular case, we're looking at, and Kent has talked about, we've all talked about it, this is a piece of property that once Checkers left, there was never any real use on that property that we were proud of. Do we want another title loan thing? We don't want that. You've got a national chain, one of the very few people that could fit in this little tiny, thin, long strip. And so, you know, that is part of the consideration, and I believe that every new project on Pulaski makes some of these other projects more possible. You know, if you were looking at Pulaski and you said, look, they have a new Burger King, they remodeled their Burger King, they remodeled their McDonald's, they got a new Taco Bell, and now you've got, you know, your national chains are where people follow. So in looking at this one piece and how big it is compared to the rest of the TIF, I think you also have to look at how much is really available that could be developed in the TIF. And this is a project that will get rid of an eyesore, and that would help us bring in some sales tax dollars and keep the real estate taxes where they are, because I think the bell got rung, so to speak, and corporate says, oh, wait a minute, we have this piece of property out there in Alsip, wherever that is, and if we can't sell it, we should have filed for vacancy. And I do believe they're going to move ahead and do that. So as Kent said, we're going to lose the revenue that's already coming into the village. Forget about the TIF. It's coming into the city if we cannot, you know, find a buyer and a user for this. And so, you know, what other type of business would look at this is part of the question I think we all have to face. So that's my little Chamber of Commerce thing. Economic development, has a lot of parts to it, including, what you're giving, but it's also part of what you're getting. So I just wanted to mention that.
Mary, it's a great wrap-up to this whole discussion, really. As we look at everything from all angles, and again, trustees that's why we're here, is to be objective, what's in the best interest of the village, and obviously we appreciate the opportunity of Ms. Lesoto's group giving us in this case yet, too. So, Mary Thompson, thanks for helping us out tonight with this presentation. Thank you, Ms. Lesota, gentlemen from the Mannheim Group, and Mr. Olivan as well, too. Great conversation tonight. Trustees, any new business? Anybody have anything?
Could you just go over how next week works then? As far as,
I'm sorry, Mike, what?
you just help us, me, want to understand the process for next week.
Absolutely. So next week, what we'll do is, next week is a typical committee meeting, and we'll have, as we always do, we'll have an agenda out for a typical committee meeting. Under economic development, we can have Mary Schmidt talk to, actually, Mary, we'd go under economic development, talking about that?
We can do that.
Okay. About the CalSec Enterprise Zone.
How that blends into the TIF and how it blends into
At the same time, trustee, great question, we'll still put under economic development will be the question of, and certainly you being the chair of, we can put down more discussion on this particular project we're talking about for the checkers. Is the only one pending at this time. We do have some applications, gentlemen, from a couple of local businesses, right? We need to consider at the same time. Because of those, does that need to be in any kind of executive session, or can it be on the, that can be on the table as well? Okay. RD land development will be on there. Okay, so trustee, we'll get you all the information on that as well then too, with background information to support what we're going to talk about with that.
They'll be getting a formal application from the
Right.
staff report to
Correct. And
I think you're speaking to whether or not there's going to be an action item.
well, that's what we were saying.
There will be.
Trustee, yeah, exactly. What we're going to do is, as we did like the night of the inauguration, sometimes you can call for a special board meeting to follow your committee meeting if we wish to pursue this. You can only vote on something if it's considered a board meeting. So we can do that in the interest of trying to support this. Otherwise, if we took it to the 5th of June of our next regular board meeting, they incur hard costs, and if for any reason we're saying no to it, I mean, we've cost this company money for no reason then too. So
I have two things. One, I have a map here that you're welcome to come up and look at afterwards. It shows the 3 TIFs. It shows the boundaries of the village. And the sort of milky yellow area is what Mary Schmidt's going to be talking about next time. It shows the enterprise zone here. That's the first thing. The second is, I don't want to be the buzzkill. I know it sounds like we're wrapping up and you as trustees are getting to go home. You're not. There's, especially the person who just laughed the most. We have some bills to sign, and the way we're going to be doing it is finance is going to be one trustee, so she's signing everything, but whatever department it comes from owes the other trustee's signature, and we do need these bills signed tonight. It's not overwhelming, but we're going to, right at the end, we're going to we're gonna hit you up for some signatures. And if you would stick around, please, we do need to get these out some of them out the door.
Studied.
Okay.
trustees, and that's what thank you, Kent. We talked about this the other day, and this was always a great practice. This was always a great practice that we had even when I was first elected in 2011, and I want to make sure we're going to stick with that practice, is now that we are meeting twice a month as a committee and twice a month as a board, we approve bills at board meetings. We approve bills, though, we approve the payment of the bills at board meetings, but we approve the actual bills at the committee meetings. We've asked all the department heads to have their bills available by committee meeting. So if you're a chair of a committee and you're receiving bills, please approve those at committee meetings and pass those over to finance for final approval. There's always 2 signatures on every expenditure around here. And if for any reason you're not here, a member of your committee is responsible for doing the same. So again, sign off on the bills that you're handed, and then get those over to finance, and they will do the same. And a lot of times, too, if for any reason the finance chair is overwhelmed, she does have a couple other committee members that can do the same on her behalf. That's the whole idea. So we have 2 trustees sign off on these expenditures. That's important to us to know that there's a good check and balance on what's going on here with our money. So, a little touche there, huh? Okay, so right back at you. Yeah. So,
Is the only...
yes.
Yes, not.
Okay. Thank you. We'll notify the clerk of that. So, okay.
Okay.
Great.
If the only thing that's going to be on the agenda for the committee meeting next week then is going to be the economic development, is there anything else that we know
No,
is...
everyone that's got a
Okay.
committee can submit something for their committee.
To that point, Mary, not to put you off again, but maybe Mary's is the last point under economic development in case there's a lot
Absolutely.
of other business
Yeah, right.
going on.
I'm here every Monday.
Okay.
Right.
And did you want to discuss, did you say there was another committee that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. The clerk just brought to my attention, too, trustees, when you were selecting committees at last board meeting, one I didn't bring up, and it was kind of a voluntary committee that I had participated in before, too, and should we get 3 volunteers to do so, we only act on this as needed, but we try to submit a report at least at the beginning of every month, was our traffic safety committee. So if 3 trustees, we don't have to do it right this moment, well, I'll bring it up next week, but if you're interested in participating in the traffic safety committee, please let me know at next week's meeting, or send me an email this week and just let me know if you're interested. Trustee Dalzell, you want to stay on that? Thanks. And you want to do it too? Okay. Trustee McLaughlin and Trustee Juarez. Great. Thank you very much, folks. And it's a good committee, and we'll get you all set up with, as far as how to access the web, I'm sorry, the emails and so forth that come in from the residents. And we try to supply a report at the first week, the first meeting of each month. Okay?
Trustee Juarez just did something that I wanted to make sure that everyone does. She just let the clerk know that she would not be at a meeting. If for any reason you're not going to be at a committee meeting or a village board meeting, please let the clerk and Maria Klocke at the village hall know. Sometimes we end up all showing up and there's not a quorum. And that's a good thing to know in advance. So please, if you're not going to be at any meeting that's scheduled, please let the clerk and Maria know.
One last thing, trustees, and I received this information right before we came in for this evening's meeting. I had a call from Tom Gavin, who's the editor for the Mount Greenwood Express newspaper that we use quite often, and he's offering us the opportunity. Apparently this year they're doing a Memorial Day publication, and they have a suggested ad that we could use with, obviously, we add in all of the names of the village elected officials. These ads will appear on their May 25th copy. Cost of a half page is $275. A quarter page ad is $150. And I told him I'd get back to him tomorrow. But when you have a chance, when we get done with the meeting, please take a look at this, and we can maybe get a consensus whether or not we want to do this thing too. For your just to take a look at, that I know of, trustees and Trustee Dalzell. I know I hate to pick on you, but I've been here 6 years. I don't remember us ever doing this in the past, have we? No. No, I didn't think so. And that's why I want to bring it to everyone's attention. But I don't know that as much as it's a nice idea, we have not done this in the past. And that's the reason I just brought it to your attention this evening. One last thing too. This came into my desk on Friday. Just for the benefit of everyone that listens at home or here as well. Water Reclamation District sent over a job opportunity, should anyone be interested, as a diversity officer for the Water Reclamation District. The opening date for this application was May 12th. It just came to my desk Friday. The closing date is May 26th, so that's in 4 days. And basically, this is the duties under direction, assist the implementation of the district's affirmative action policies to ensure compliance with federal, state, and district affirmative action and equal opportunity laws. The requirements as basically a driver's license, graduation from a 4-year accredited college, or university majoring in business or public administration, or a field involving review of affirmative action programs for compliance with state and federal regulations. Substitution could be experienced in monitoring and reviewing affirmative action programs for compliance with the state and federal regulations, and they may be substituted for the required education on a 4-year basis. So should anyone be interested in something like that, again, this is from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. Any old business? Okay, can I get a motion for adjournment?